podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the Mappable USA studios here in Las Vegas. And folks, today we're going to talk about crowdfunding. We're going to talk about crowdfunding options. We're going to go through all these tools. We're going to go over differences in which type of crowdfunding. We're just going to really kill on the crowdfunding end of it today from a top level down. And before we get into that, let's introduce Vicky Hutchmala from the QOZ Marketplace and the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, Ron. I mean, here we are in Vegas. Casinos are open. It's 104 degrees. The sun is shining. The only thing better is we have an excellent guest on our podcast today, and we're going to learn all about crowdfunding and Reg.A and making money.
Yeah, and besides that, our guest might be an even better city than Vegas because this guy's from San Diego. So let's introduce Mike Brette. Mike is the CEO of Small Cap Equity Advisors. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your show.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. Like we talked before this podcast started, one of my favorite cities, San Diego. You live there. You're living a life, aren't you, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful city. It's probably about 80 degrees now, but it's livable.
Yeah, it's so tough being at 80 degrees. Oh, my God.
Yeah, as opposed to 104.
I know.
But, Michael, I'm really looking forward to this podcast because, so many people think of like crowdfunding and they have different ideas about what it really is and different ways to do it, and they're all confused all the time. So I'd like to kind of get into that today on the show. But before we do that, let's talk about you a little bit. Tell us about your background and how you got to be where you're at and all about Small Cap Equity Advisors.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Again, it's Mike Brette, and I've been in business a little over 25 years. And I've been doing consulting and advisory work with small cap public companies and private companies. I help them with raising capital, investor relations, marketing, public relations. I do a lot of road shows with clients up until we had this pandemic. We used to schedule events here in California and on the East Coast where clients would come in and make a presentation to 25 investment bankers and broker-dealers. I've got my law degree for over 42 years, and I help companies with their private placements, getting investors to take a look at their transactions, help them structure, and I give them advice along the way on what to do and what not to do.
Well, that's got to keep you busy because there's a lot of people out there looking for money. There's a lot of people, especially now you mentioned with this COVID and staying at home and doing all these virtual things here and there. So what do you do with these guys? Do they just come up to you and say, help me out, or how do you first engage the client on something like that?
That's a good point. That's a good question. I've been in business a long time, like I said, 25 years. So a lot of deal flow I get is from referrals. But I get, emails from LinkedIn and other places like that. And most of the time it's a true startup company that maybe is like an idea on the back of a napkin. And those are really tough deals, especially in this environment. I typically work with a little more seasoned companies, companies that have revenue, that have a proven concept, whether it's a product or service that they're doing. And they need some kind of a structure to raise some capital. Now, the biggest misconception that is out there is you can raise capital with a business plan, or you can raise capital with a pitch deck. And I get this all the time, and I try to educate the people that, look, there's only two legal ways to raise capital. You have to have a full registration with the SEC, or you have to file under one of the exemptions for registration. An exemption would be under Reg.D, 506, 504, 505. Those are the only two ways, and those require paperwork to be filed with the SEC and different documentation with state and federal regulators. Because when you're doing a security, selling a security, you've got to comply with state and federal security laws. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions. People, again, just want to use a business plan or they want to use a pitch deck. They think they can go out and talk to investors, show them their business plan, and then pick up a check. That violates a lot of state and federal security laws and could cause a lot of problems for everybody. So that's one of the hurdles I have to face.
Yeah, that's a big difference too, because a lot of these guys who are doing it that way, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'll get my money. I'll do the pitch deck. I'll do this, and then once I get that check, then all of a sudden I have money to go and go to the SEC." It's a bad time frame on that for sure.
Yeah, it's too late then, and that's why. And that's one reason why they passed the Jobs Act in 2012. The SEC passed the Jobs Act to make it making access capital for small businesses a little easier. Before the Jobs Act was passed, you couldn't advertise, you couldn't market, promote, you couldn't get on a podcast, you couldn't do seminars, you couldn't do anything to promote your offering to raise capital. With the Jobs Act, they passed several elements in the Jobs Act. One is CF, equity crowdfunding. The other one is 506C as a private placement, and Regulation A as a method of raising capital. Now, all those steps the SEC passed to help small businesses allow the small business to advertise, market, and promote their offering. So they can put their SEC paperwork together, or have a securities lawyer put the necessary documents together, and then they can advertise and promote. Now, with equity crowdfunding, you can go to there's 50 different platforms out there. You have MicroVentures, Flash Funder, Start Engine, many different funding platforms that are SEC approved. You can get all your documentation together and upload it to that platform, and then you could begin marketing and advertising your offering.
Well, and people need to understand too that it's not it's not an easy, and it's not a cheap process. It takes a lot of time. You have to have experts like yourself help them through the process, and you're not going to have the money that you need next week.
That's a really good point. That's an excellent point. The other misconception about raising capital is it's free. Again, I don't know how many phone calls or emails I get from people who want to raise $1 million or $5 million, and they don't have any money. Well, I paid somebody to put a business plan together and the pitch deck. Now I don't have any money to market the offering. The biggest expense, or the most important element of raising money, no matter if you're using equity crowdfunding, 506C, or if you're using Reg.A, the biggest element is marketing. Investors can't write you a check if they've never heard of your deal. And
exactly.
the only way they're going to hear is if you promote the offering. And the other misconception is people think if they put their offering on a platform, that the platform is going to advertise and promote their offering. They can't. It's illegal. The SEC will not allow a platform to specifically target and promote one offering over another. Now, what they can do, the platform can, put an announcement out that says the following 10 companies have uploaded their documents to our platform, but that's it. They can put out an announcement, but they can't market. So it's up to you. It's up to the issuer to promote their own offering and direct investors to the platform.
Well, exactly, and that takes a different kind of professional, somebody who actually can help you market, because as you said, nobody's going to invest in you if they don't know what you're doing, if they have never heard of you. You can have the best widget there is in the world, but if nobody knows, nobody's going to give you any money.
Absolutely, absolutely right. And let me give you a little breakdown. If you're trying to raise $5 million, there's a few ways you can raise it. You can find one investor to write you the check for $5 million, which is almost impossible. You can find two people to each write a check for $2.5 million, or you can find 5,000 investors to each write you a check for $1,000. Any of those elements that I just discussed requires marketing in order to find those investors. Whether it's one investor or 5,000, you have to be able to reach out to them either through, radio, television, social media marketing, email marketing. You have to be able to reach out to a large number. Now, let me give you some other statistics. If you're trying to find 5,000 people to write you a check for $1,000, let's say you have a conversion rate of 2.5%. That means you're going to have to get your deal in front of 2 million potential investors.
Yeah.
If you have a conversion rate of 1%, that means you've got to get your deal in front of 500,000 people in order to find 5,000 people to write your check for 1,000. Without a marketing budget, it's almost impossible to raise money under any circumstances.
Well, and people think marketing comes after the fact, but in reality, marketing is the very first thing you have to think of and the very first thing that you have to do after you've created your business plan and hired your securities attorney. Exactly.
Great points to make. And that's, again, that's one of the flaws that most people have when it comes to raising capital. You know, they pay a securities lawyer to put the documents together. They paid somebody to put a business plan together. They paid an accountant to do all the financial statements. Then they come to me or somebody like me and say, okay, we have all of our documents. Now we need to raise money. And my first question is, what's your budget for marketing? Oh, we don't have any money left. We paid everybody else. We don't have any money. And I'm saying, well, I'm sorry, you know, without a marketing budget, you know, it's just not going to work. I mean, who are we going to show your documents to? And so it's a big stumbling point. It's an educational process, and it's difficult sometimes to talk to people about it.
Yeah, we just did a podcast recently on this very topic, and I'm just amazed at the number of people who are really good in business that don't understand this kind of thing. I think the problem is these CEOs. They think they're really smart, and they develop a company, they develop a widget or some kind of product, and they say, okay, well, this is great. Everyone should think this is great, just because I said it. And it's not that easy. It's like, it just, this is what drives this is what turned my hair gray dealing with these people, because you have to get it through their minds that marketing is essential. And not only is it essential, but it's not cheap either to do it on the right way. These guys have to have a budget for that. And when you tell them what their budget should be, they look at you like deer in the headlights, like, oh, I didn't expect that. Right? It just drives you crazy.
And what the budget really, the rule of thumb is you need to have at least a 10% budget for the amount you're trying to raise. So if you're trying to raise $1 million, you have to have 10% of that, or $100,000, set aside for marketing, for social media, email marketing, whatever the tools that are going to be used. The rule of thumb is at least 10% that you have to set aside. The other misconception that's out there is people think that you can hire an unlicensed money finder and pay them a success commission or fee if they bring an investor to the table that writes a check. That's illegal. I don't know how many times I've had to say that to people. You cannot hire an individual or a firm to solicit money and close financing for you and pay them a commission upon success. Only a FINRA licensed broker dealer can do that. And, people just don't want to believe it because so many people have done it illegally and gotten away with it that it's almost like it's an unwritten rule out there that, you can hire your gardener to go out and shop money for you and pay him a commission if they're successful, and it's illegal. There are some stringent penalties that happen if you do something like that.
There's just really no shortcut to making money. You have to know what you're doing. Aside from creating the best widget in the world, you still have to know what you're doing, and you can't do it by yourself. There's no DIY in making money, and especially crowdfunding, and when you get into Regulation A or D or whichever one you're going to. You got to know what you're doing and have people help you and advise you along the way if you want to be successful.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what we do. It's a complicated process to raise money with crowdfunding, with a private placement or Regulation A. They all require a lot of money for attorneys to put the paperwork together, accountants, and then you have your marketing. And then if you're going to go public, which I've taken a number of companies public over the years, you have listing fees with the exchange, with NASDAQ, New York, and the process of going public is not cheap, and the process to stay public and current on all your SEC filings is not cheap. So raising money is an expensive and time-consuming process, and that's one of the things that myself and my associates, we counsel clients to say, look, your CEO has got to be committed to the time necessary to talk to investors, to get on the radio or a podcast, to have a meeting, and you got to commit the time and the money and the resources to be successful at raising capital. It's really an educational process.
Yeah, and
I worked with attorneys for a long time, and one of the things that was so flabbergasting to me was how many people came in to fix the mess that they made when they thought they could do it themselves. Regardless of what it was, it cost them twice as much money to fix it before they could even go forward because they thought they knew how to do it.
That's another good point.
It's just crazy.
There's if somebody's trying to do a private placement, they have to have what's called a PPM, a private placement memorandum. It's like a prospectus. Typically, it's 100 to 150 pages in length, and it's really a disclosure document of the risks involved with your particular deal. It's required by the SEC, and SEC attorneys normally charge anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000 or more to put that document together. Now, some people try to go online and find a template for $200 to put their own, to kind of fill in the blanks and put their own PPM together. And they think that's going to work. It won't, because if you try to go take that document to a broker-dealer, the compliance department at the broker-dealer will not allow their brokers to sell that deal because it wasn't prepared by an SEC attorney.
Exactly.
So they're just wasting their time, and then they got to try to find an SEC attorney, to redo it, and they end up spending more money doing it that way than if they started out right.
Always.
Yeah, and Mike, before we talked about this whole thing about crowdfunding and Reg.CF and Reg.A and PPMs and the 506, what makes one better than another in terms of like a guy who wants to start crowdfunding? What's the difference between all these different options that they have?
Good question. The equity crowdfunding under CF, you can raise up to $1 million every 12 months. Most companies use equity crowdfunding under CF, Regulation CF, to raise $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, max. Because if you stay under those dollar amounts, you don't have to have audited financial statements, and the requirements are less. So usually a true startup will try to use that equity crowdfunding. Now, if you're trying to raise, let's say $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, then you'd want to use a 506C private placement, because under 506C, the dollar amount you can raise is unlimited. So for more seasoned companies trying to raise larger amounts, they can use 506C. Now, under Regulation A+, the company can raise up to $50 million from accredited and non-accredited investors. And with a Reg.A+, if you can qualify, you can also get your offering listed on NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange and become a public company. So each one of the elements has, their benefits and their drawbacks. Under equity crowdfunding, the one we first talked about, you can solicit money from accredited and non-accredited. Under 506C private placement, you can only solicit money from accredited investors. Now, years ago, you could have the investors sign a suitability questionnaire that just basically says, yes, I'm an accredited investor, check off the boxes and sign it. And you could get away with that. But the Jobs Act changed it and said, look, the SEC said, look, if you want to use 506C and be able to advertise and promote your offering, you can only take investment capital from accredited investors, and you have to take reasonable steps to verify that they indeed are accredited, which means you have to do the following. You have to get copies of tax returns, copies of bank statements. You have to get a letter from their attorney, a letter from their CPA, attesting to the fact that they are accredited investors. So you have to take those extra steps. If you don't, and you take money from somebody that turns out not to be accredited, you lose that exemption from registration, and you have to give the money back that you raised.
Oh boy.
So
yeah,
it's a very tricky area to get into, and you can't really do it by yourself.
Or you can use a third-party verification source for that. Can you use like a KYC or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's companies. There's one called Verify Investor. There's several independent. If you can use them, that's fine. As long as you don't try to do it yourself, you let them go through the state. Now, that's one reason I like to work with broker dealers. If I'm doing a larger offering for a client, I work through the broker dealers because their back office does all the vetting process of making sure the investors are credited.
Right.
My clients don't
correct.
have to do it. I don't have to do it. The broker dealer does it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And on a lot of these deals too, when you're looking at raising money via these crowdfunding methods, you spoke mostly about you work with some of these companies that go public on the exchange. Now these are, it doesn't matter whether you do Reg.A or anything like that. There's still an option to go public on these, or do you have to be like a tier 2, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. There's a couple of ways of going public. You can do an S1 registration, which is a full registration with the SEC. You can do a reverse merger, which is reversing your company into a publicly traded shell, which I advise against, and for a lot of reasons. Or you can do a direct registration, which some companies have done recently, which you bypass broker-dealers and underwriters and just do it direct with NASDAQ. Or you can go through the Reg.A Plus process and do all the qualifications, raise your money, and then get listed to go public on one of the exchanges. Now, when Reg.A Plus first was passed, there were a lot of companies using it that were really startup companies. They didn't have any revenue, and they went through the process. They raised some money at real high valuations. They ended up getting listed on NASDAQ, and their stock was $5 to $7 when they got listed. And about within 90 days after the listing, the stock dropped to about 50 cents.
Oh, geez.
And there are a lot of reasons for it. The main reason was the valuations were extremely high when they were raising the money and when they got listed. And then after they got listed, reality sunk in, and the market realized, wait a minute, these companies are really overvalued, and so the price dropped. Well, NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange said, look, we're not going to let any companies do a Reg.A Plus unless they've been in business at least 2 years with revenue, substantial revenue for 2 years, and with audited financial statements. And then there has to be a seasoning. So they've kind of tightened up the rules and regulations so they can avoid those market crashes.
Well, which only really makes sense, because if you're going to go through the entire process, which isn't cheap and takes a long time, then overvaluing yourself just cuts off your nose to spite your face. So even though they made that regulation, that was a good thing for everyone because it helped them down the road.
And, the one thing I try to counsel companies on also, whether they're private or they're thinking of going public, is I ask the question, what's your valuation? And you would be surprised how many companies don't have an official third-party valuation. They just pull a number out of the air. Like if somebody's going to invest $1 million into a company, this is a true story. I had one company come to me and say, we're looking to raise $1 million. And I said, what's your valuation? Well, we're going to give 10% away of the company for the $1 million. And I said, so you're telling me that your pre-money valuation, you're looking for $1 million, and your post-money valuation is going to be $10 million. That's what your company's going to be worth, $10 million, and you have no revenue, no products, no traction, no sales. You're basically a startup, and you're trying to tell an investor you got a post-money valuation of $10 million. They missed the point altogether, and valuation is the last thing that a company wants to spend money on, but it's so critical to determine how much you give away in equity to investors, that you really need to give some thought to evaluation.
Yeah, people
Sounds like you've been
are
watching Shark Tank a lot, huh?
Pardon?
People are too focused on.
I said you look like you're watching Shark Tank a lot with those valuation questions, right?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to that because it's so critical when in negotiating. Now, a lot of startups, if you're a true startup with an ID on the back of a napkin and you're looking for $100,000 or $200,000, you can kind of work with the investor. You don't have an official valuation, and then you can kind of agree upon what you think the value should be, and you go back and forth. But if you start raising serious money in a Series A round, Series B round, and other rounds of financing, you really got to have your valuation set so that you don't give away too much equity and dilute yourself as an owner.
Well, and the people that you're looking to invest in your project, they're more sophisticated if they have that kind of money to invest. They're not even going to bother with looking at anything that all of the facts and information aren't there.
Yes, excellent point. Again, that's true. That's I deal with a lot of family offices too, as well as investment banks and broker dealers. And the first thing they ask is the valuation. They want to see a third party. Not an appraisal. They want to see a valuation done by a third-party company as to how they arrived at the figures and everything like that. I have one client. It's called Tequila Comisario. It's a ultra-premium tequila, and we did a valuation for them that came in at $130 million for a valuation 2 years ago. We did a recent evaluation for them, and it comes in at $280 million. That's how much they've added, how much value they've added to their company, and that really goes a long way when you're talking about raising money from investors. And they've raised about $15 million. They've been a client of mine for the last 5 years, and I've known the investors the principals for over 20 years. In fact, we just got the contract in Las Vegas for all the MGM casino properties, all 16 casinos. Yeah. And we got that
quite a few casinos.
Pardon?
I said the MGM casinos is more than just the MGM. It's not one
they have
property.
16.
It's several properties.
They have 16 casinos in Las Vegas, and we got all 16 of them. And they're starting to open back up. Now, this pandemic kind of threw a monkey wrench into it, but we're starting to shift the product to all the casinos. So again, the reason I bring that up is valuation is important. It helped us get the contract with the MGM casinos, and we've got distribution set up in 30 states nationwide. So it really goes a long way of establishing credibility for your company.
Absolutely. When you do your homework, you have more credibility, you create your reputation, and that opens you up to more potential customers who are going to buy whatever widget it is you have that you're selling. It all makes sense when you look at the big picture. You can't just separate it into this part and that part and whatever part. It has to be a big picture, and you have to anticipate what's going to happen in the future if you want to be successful, because it's not cheap. As I said, it's not cheap, and it doesn't take – it's time-consuming.
Absolutely. And, with equity crowdfunding, no matter which equity crowdfunding tool that you use, you're also marketing your product or your service. In addition to raising money, you're getting the word out there. When you're marketing your offering, you're getting additional customers. You're opening up new vendors. You're opening up new channels of distribution by marketing your company in a professional manner. So you're not only raising capital, you're establishing your brand as well as marketing, the product and the offering, and it all takes money. It's Vicki, as you pointed out, it's not cheap.
Money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you need money to make money. So, Mike, let me ask you a question. Now that we talked about crowdfunding, what would you say? Tell our audience what basically the size of the offerings that you've done and the length of time it took from when they came to you to when they had their capital.
Good point. Good. Normally it takes if you're doing an equity crowdfund raise under CF and you're trying to raise about $500,000, normally it takes about 90 days of marketing. If everything goes well and if the client, responds in a timely fashion to everything that's required, it's about 90 days. If you're looking at a 506c private placement where you're trying to raise $5 million to $10 million, you're looking at a 4 to 6 month process, because something like that has to be syndicated with investment banks and additional broker dealers. So it's a more laborious process. So, but your time frame anywhere from 90 days to 6 months.
Oh,
okay.
That's pretty good.
And then another thing is one more question for you, Mike, before we kind of close this out. Do you see some of these clients using these different tools or these different options to kind of like piggyback on each other? For example, somebody who may want to raise, let's say, $1 million through a Reg.CF in order to do a Reg.A later on and after that. Are people doing things like that?
Yes, and that's an excellent point to make. That's what I counsel some clients that look, let's raise $500,000 under Regulation CF because that's all you can really justify. You can't justify more than that. Then let's use part of that proceeds to get your prototype done or get something else going for your company, and then use part of the proceeds to do a private placement under 506C, and let's raise $3 million. Now, then we'll raise the $3 million. Now let's go for a $10 million raise. So you kind of stair-step your capital raise by using the different tools under crowdfunding. And if you get eventually, you can get up to Regulation A and you can raise $50 million.
Yeah, and that's every year you could do that, right?
Yes, every 12 months.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then at that point, if you even want to go further, that's when you start looking at being listed on an exchange in which you can really raise a ton of money, obviously. And but one of the points that you mentioned earlier is really interesting too. It costs money. It costs a lot of money to keep that listing alive on a market, right? I mean, it's not cheap to do that.
Yeah, it can take anywhere. Even a small cap company can take $250,000 a year just to stay current on all your audits and SEC filings. And if you're a major company with major revenue, it could be in the millions of dollars just to stay public. So, if the only reason to go public is so you can raise capital. So, because it's an expensive process to go public and it's an expensive process to stay public. And if you don't have that goal in mind, then you're better off just staying as a private company because it's very expensive to be a public company. I've taken a number of companies public over my career. A lot of them have been very, very successful. Some of them haven't been because management has failed to deliver on what they're supposed to deliver on. But that's what we're here for. We're here to provide advice and counsel to companies, whether they're private companies, small cap public companies. We want to guide them through the process of raising capital and marketing their deals.
Yeah, excellent. So if anyone's listening to this podcast right now, no matter what stage in the company they're at, and they want to find out more information about this, how do they get a hold of you, Mike? What's the best way to reach you?
They can call my number at 951-236-8473, or they can email me at Brette, BRETTE @gmail.com, or they could go to LinkedIn, and I have an extensive profile on LinkedIn, and they could just look at my profile on LinkedIn. Yeah, we're going to link all that stuff in the show notes as well. I got one more question for you before we close this out. You mentioned your tequila company there, which, by the way, is probably the first time we ever mentioned tequila on the podcast. It's pretty cool. But anyway, do you see any major industries that are coming to you in particular, real estate, medical? Is there anything that's hot right now that you see a lot of? Yes, good point. Medical, with this pandemic that we've all had to go through, healthcare companies are going to be the next hot thing for starting now for the next 20 years. Anything that's in healthcare, whether it's pandemic related or not, but if it's healthcare, it's really hot. Real estate investment trust, REITs, are very hot and a very good tool to use Regulation A+ to raise money for. What's going to happen in the real estate market in the major cities like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, with everybody getting used to working out of their homes now, and corporations saying, look, you can work from home or remotely if you want, commercial real estate is going to be in the tank. It's just going to be devastated. So if you can develop a fund of real estate money to go out and buy up commercial real estate that's going to be hit by people not being able to pay their rent on commercial real estate, that's where people are going to make a ton of money in commercial real estate now. And so the crowdfunding is a very useful tool under Regulation A+ to put together a REIT to go out and acquire commercial real estate.
Totally agree. So So, Vicki, what do you think? Should we equity crowdfund the podcast? How about that?
Oh, now that sounds like a score, Ron. But you know what? Let me ask Mike one last question. So,
yes.
Mike, aside from the crowdfunding and the tools in the Jobs Act, what's your opinion of the blockchain and raising capital through tokenization?
You know, I'm not really a big fan of tokens. To me, if you're trying to raise capital in selling a token, you might as well sell a stock certificate to raise money. The biggest mistake I see with companies trying to do tokens is they don't have an SEC counsel to tell them and guide them through the process that it's a security. They keep coming up with this idea that, oh, no, it's not a security, it's a token, so they feel they don't have to comply with SEC rules and regulations. You can't do battle with the SEC on something like that. The SEC has a very defined line. If you're selling something to somebody that you're promising to them it's going to fluctuate in value and possibly go up in value, it's a security, and you need to either register it as a security or file it for one of the exemptions. These companies trying to do tokens, they try to say, oh, it's not a security, it's a token. No, it's a security. If you're telling people it's going to go up in value once they buy it, it's a security. So, I don't have a problem, representing somebody, but the problem I've run into is they don't want to follow the rules and regulations laid out by the SEC. And I won't touch a deal that if they don't have a securities document in place to explain it to a. I mean, you can see all the deals that the SEC has come down on for billions and billions of dollars when they haven't done it correctly, and it's really a land minefield right now.
Well, and it goes to show that whoever you work with, whoever your advisor is, they have to know what they're doing so that they can advise you, and you have to do your homework and your due diligence to make sure that they are following whatever rules apply to whatever industry you're in. We've done podcasts with companies that work the blockchain and issue tokens and that, but the only ones we have done podcasts with are those companies that are 100% SEC compliant, so that whoever comes to them, whatever customers they have for what they're doing, can be assured that whatever they're doing is legitimate and follows all the rules and regulations, because that's very important. Just like with crowdfunding, if you don't do it right and if you don't do all of your due diligence, you're going to end up holding the bag and it's going to have a giant hole in it.
And that's a good point, because with equity crowdfunding, you can advertise and promote the offering, but there's certain things you can say and certain things you cannot say. With equity crowdfunding on the CF, the only thing you can email out or promote is you can say, XYZ company is doing an equity crowdfund offering. Here's the link. And that link has to direct them to the SEC funding platform, period.
Yeah.
You can't say, we're doing an equity crowdfunding under CF and we're selling common stock at 10 cents a share, and you can't discuss the terms of the offering.
Yeah, so, and that's and if you see anything like that, then you know that you need to walk away from that, because that they're not doing what needs to be done. Exactly.
It causes problems, and each one of the elements, 506C has the rules and regulations. And Reg.A Plus has rules and regulations. You have to follow them, and it costs money. We're a fee-based consulting company. We don't do anything for free. We charge a fee for every service that we provide, and we never have a problem collecting our fee from companies that have money. When the company doesn't have any money, that's the problem, and those are the companies we want to stay away from, because they never want to do the raise in a legal manner. They don't want to follow state and federal security laws, and we will participate in any kind of offerings like that. So
it's just
the proper way to do things.
You can't shortcut doing these kinds of things, not when there's so many rules and regulations that you have to comply with. You cannot, absolutely cannot shortcut it and try and do it the easy way, because you'll just create a huge mess for yourself.
Yes, and there's some serious penalties. I know we're running out of time, but there are serious penalties if you violate security laws. Like if you pay an unlicensed finder a commission, and it doesn't work for a FINRA licensed firm, or if you don't follow the correct SEC rules and regulations, there are civil and criminal penalties that can attach to the whole deal. And then the SEC can make you give all the money back. They can rescind your offering and make you give the investors money back at any point in time. It could be 5 years down the line when you've already spent all the money. Yeah. And then what are you going to do? So, it really there's an old saying that you think hiring a professional is expensive. Wait till you hire an amateur and see how expensive it is.
Or try and do it yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, and try to do it yourself. It doesn't work.
Mike, that's why we do the podcast, because we bring industry professionals, people who know what they're doing, onto the podcast so people can learn from them. Anybody out there who's interested in equity crowdfunding, this is the reason why we do it. And the tidbits that we got today are amazing. Anyone who's doing this got to be listening to this podcast over and over again. So I want to thank you for taking the time out and talk to our audience. Everything. It's been a real pleasure, and you were great. I hope we get you on again. As new deals happen. It was a real pleasure.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yes, and Vicki, you want to close it out with something, or should I just finish it off?
Well, I think this was fabulous, and as you said, Ron, anybody who's listening needs to take to heart what Mike has told them and tell all their friends to take to heart what Mike has told them, and then call him up and ask for his advice.
You don't want to be on the bad side of the FCC, so we'll kind of leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Yes,
right,
a lot of good $1 million is going to do you when you're sitting in jail.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
You'll be the richest guy in the jail. So, all right, everyone, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at MappableUSA.com. If you go to that website, go to the homepage, scroll down, you'll see all our syndication sources. Pick the one you like best so you never miss another one of these episodes. Listen, if you like what you heard today, send us an email, info@MappableUSA.com, or comment on the page that you're listening to this at. It'd be great. And finally, if you want to be a guest on the show like Mike was today, there's a guest tab on the top of the page. Click on that, fill out the form. We'll see what we can do about getting you on the show. So once again, everyone, thank you for listening. Thanks for all your help, and we'll be back at you next week with another Mappable USA episode. Have a great week, everyone.